Do you agree? So
the judge did look at the evidence. I said, look, I'm not paying your licence under Section 15, Article 3 of the Terrorism Act. And they went through the procedure. I got the court summons, went to court. They asked me if I was guilty. I said, no, I'm not guilty of having an appropriate licence because the licence isn't appropriate because I'll be funding terrorism, because I know the BBC's covered up the true events of the day. And eventually we arrive here today, and the result has been, I have to say, a fair judge in my opinion, that I have not been convicted. I have no fine. Court costs £200, which you guys have very generously donated to, and I have to behave myself and get a TV licence, of course, which I'll be running down the post office tomorrow to buy. But hopefully we've set a little precedent here where we might encourage people to go and do the same thing, and go to their police, tell them about today, give them the evidence. West Sussex Police have said they're investigating it, which they're obliged to do because the BBC had prior knowledge of a terrorist event, which under, I think it's Section 38 of the Terrorism Act, they should have reported, which they didn't. And they've since given us this impossible flannel about World Trade Center 7 collapsing due to an office fire, which even in the NIST report says fell at free fall speed for 8 floors in 2.5 seconds. Now that is absolutely impossible without a controlled demolition being involved. Absolutely impossible. There's no arguments around it. Don't let anyone else tell you otherwise, because they're saying Isaac Newton is wrong.
Why did he do it for the TV licence with BBC? Because primarily Jane Stanley in 9/11 from the BBC reported 23 minutes before World Trade Center Building 7 collapsed that it had actually fallen. So that indicated some prior knowledge that the BBC had in terms of the events of 9/11. And we've never had a satisfactory explanation from the BBC as to how they had that prior knowledge and made the mistake of announcing the fall of the tower before it actually did.
I'm Peter Drew. I'm representing architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth as the UK facilitator. Today I was going to give evidence as part of myself and 2 other individuals back in 2011 lodged some official complaints with the BBC about 2 of the documentaries that they showed in 2011 as part of the 10th anniversary of 9/11. And the BBC, as Ian Hinshaw has just described, they have very strict requirements through their Royal Charter and their agreement and their editorial guidelines, where they have to present information that is impartial and accurate, and they are required to correct any mistakes that they make. And one of the very important pieces of evidence that we were going to present today was in 2007, the BBC, in one of their documentaries, suggested that Building 7 did not come down at free fall speed, and said that the scientists and the architects who were suggesting that it had come down at free fall speed were wrong. But then in 2008 we had the official investigators who came out and actually then said, well, no, Building 7 did come down at free fall speed, which is a huge statement to make, because we know that it can only come down at free fall speed through controlled demolition. So the BBC had made a very, very big mistake in 2007 by saying that freefall had not occurred.
BBC was incompetent, verging on dishonest. Or let's rephrase that, dishonest. I was the leading author on 9/11 when they did their Conspiracy Files programmes. I never had a phone call from them. Now, they might have disagreed with me, they might have disliked me, but as they're paid by the public to investigate impartially and give a full account of what happens, and if they're doing a film about so-called conspiracy theories, then that obliges them to talk to anybody who's in the position that I was. I'd been serialised in the Daily Mail. Instead they got some guys from America who had some pretty cookie ideas and presented them to the public as the face of the 9/11 investigators, who they call conspiracy theorists.
You've published 2 books on 9/11, is that right?
Yeah, 9/11 Revealed, which was serialised in the Daily Mail and sold tens of thousands of copies, and 9/11 The New Evidence, which is the update on that book, which was a very detailed look into the paper trail, particularly of the 9/11 attacks and the role of the FBI and the CIA in facilitating the 9/11 attacks.
And yet the BBC had no interest in talking to you.
They had no interest in talking to me. They didn't even phone me up. They didn't email me. Even the people who made one of the propaganda films, Flight 93, they spent 3 hours talking to me. They didn't take a blind bit of notice of anything I said, but they did go to the trouble of phoning and talking. The BBC had a lot of resources. They don't want to know. They were grossly dishonest in their investigations of the 9/11 attacks, and that's what I was here to say to the court today.
Unfortunately, the court today, the judge didn't let us demonstrate all the evidence. We had some very good witnesses: Tony Farrell, former intelligence officer for South Yorkshire Police; Niels Harrit, eminent scientist from Copenhagen; Ray Savage, former counter-terrorism officer. Who else am I leaving out? Peter Drew, wonderful chap, coordinated the campaign against the BBC, trying to find out about Building 7, which they refused to talk about. Adrian Mallet, former firefighter, engineer. I had a good load of witnesses lined up, but we weren't allowed to present them. That said, the judge has seen the evidence. He said he's seen the evidence, so we now know that for a fact that one judge in this country is very aware of what happened on 9/11, and I have no conviction.
Do you have the judge's name, please?
Judge Stephen Nichols, I believe.
Oh.
Do you know him?
Oh, yes.
Yes. No, a nice chap, it has to be said. It has to be said.
Yes.
And towards the end of the case, for anyone who wasn't in the room, I did kick off a little bit because, I mean, it does come down to a question of morality. Do you keep funding these bloody paedophile rings at the BBC? I know this is... it's sub judice, but I think it's been fairly well established that what's going on. And do we fund an organisation that tells us the impossible, that Building 7 fell because of an office fire? It's utter crap, and we should stop paying them. Go to your police station, go to your lawyer, wherever you have to go. I wouldn't bother petitioning your MPs, they're a complete shower of shit in my opinion. But go to the police, tell them. Sussex Police has said it's with divisional intelligence. We'll get it to other divisional intelligence as well, wherever you live. Get them there and do your best, you know, because it's not an imprisonable offence, TV licensing. And I got the lowest possible punishment today. I didn't get convicted. The judge took the stuff seriously, and so he should, because you can't get any more serious than Isaac Newton. And you know, it's an immutable law of science, and the BBC have been lying. And if they want to take me to court for saying that they're liars, fine, we'll go back.
For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing, and indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were, and it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. There's almost a sense downtown in New York behind me, down by the World Trade Centers, of just an area completely closed off as the rescue workers try to do their job. But this isn't the first building that has suffered as a result. We know that part of the Marriott Hotel next to the World Trade Center also collapsed as a result of this huge amount of falling debris from 110 floors of the two twin towers of the World Trade Center. As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline, a symbol of the financial prosperity of this city, but completely disappeared now, and New York is still unable to take on board what has happened to them today.
Presumably there were very few people in the Salomon building when it collapsed. I mean, there were, I suppose, fears of possible further collapses around the area.
That's what you would hope, because this whole downtown area behind me has been completely sealed off and evacuated, apart from the emergency workers. That was done by the mayor, Rudy Giuliani, much earlier today, because of course, the dreadful collapse of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. But New York, very much a city still in chaos. The phones are not working properly, the subway lines are not working properly, and we know that down there near the World Trade Center there are 3 schools that are being turned into triage centers for emergency treatment. And I know that over in New York Harbor, where the famous Statue of Liberty is, there's a field hospital where 1,500 people are being treated, and we have heard, though it's unconfirmed as yet, that 100 New York City police officers have been taken there as well for treatment. But we do need to confirm those figures for the officers.
It's now, some 8 hours since the attacks. Is there any estimate yet available of the number of casualties in the World Trade Center?
I think we can only go at this point with the words expressed by the mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, that it's too frightening to think how many there could be. We know that it's about almost 300 people on the airliners that were used in these attacks. But you've got to remember, this was 9 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday morning. It's busy in downtown Manhattan, in the financial district then. The World Trade Center itself has 50,000 workers. There are tens of thousands of tourists who go up there every day. The figures are almost too frightening to contemplate. You can understand why nobody yet wants to put a figure on them.
Listening to the mayor, Rudy Giuliani, a bit earlier, one of his messages was, business as usual. We won't let this get us down. But presumably, a lot of Manhattan people must have fled the city to Long Island to get away from possible further attacks.
Well, a lot of people were certainly trying to, but you remember that very early on, all the bridges and tunnels to the city, as well as the airports, were closed. New York was sealed, essentially. Now, we do know that the Long Island Railroad has begun running again to get people out of the city if they can, and people who can't manage to get out and perhaps lived in that area, they're being offered accommodation in empty school buildings. But certainly I saw earlier on today huge crowds of people desperately trying to walk up upper Manhattan to get as far away as possible. I think nobody really knows how to go or where to go, and you have to remember, even now, I don't think people can sink in to people what's happened.
We haven't, for the past hour or so, heard much from the people of Manhattan. You're with them there. I mean, what are they saying tonight after this catastrophic attack?
As I said, many just cannot believe this has happened, and I've seen, big burly men and women with, tears in their eyes today, shaking their heads, wondering what on earth is going on. There was a sense of panic. Our reports from the scene were of people just absolutely horrified, and I've already seen some photographs of that a man took down in the downtown area, and it looks like the aftermath of a huge atom bomb or something, just full of debris and of like a white carpeting of snow from all the dust and rubbish that had fallen. I don't think people can comprehend. They certainly have lost any feeling of safety. There's still a great pride in the city. People are determined to fight back, but a great sense of shock and loss. People keep looking at the sky, for example, where you can see the plume of smoke, and say, when that's gone, it won't be there anymore. Our Twin Towers won't be there. Such a symbol of New York.
Are they talking yet about revenge and what the government should do to counter this threat, or are they numb still?
I think people are still numb, and I don't think people are talking about revenge in that way at all yet. I think people are still too traumatized. We don't know how many people have been killed. We can't even put a figure. I think when you talk to people on they daren't even say how many people might have been killed and injured. And I think that feeling, until idea of the devastation, people don't really know what to say or what to think. I think they feel the bubble of their security as being in America has definitely been popped. This city and this country will not be the same, but they don't really know where to turn. That's the very sad thing. I think there's going to be a lot of very, very traumatized people that has hit them very, very hard.
Jane, I think many of us, when we heard the news, perhaps on the radio earlier today, were completely flabbergasted by it and just couldn't comprehend it. I mean, it almost sounded too far-fetched. I was wondering what it's felt like for you being in Manhattan. Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley in Manhattan. Perhaps we can rejoin her and follow that up later. Across